This is John Gilroy from the Constellations Podcast.
This is Rachit Bhatia from LeoLabs.
Today we're going to talk about situational awareness. Hit the music, Manny.
Welcome to Constellations, the podcast from Kratos, where industry leaders share their thoughts and experience on the future of space business, policy, and opportunity. If you like Constellations, please support us by giving a rating and review on iTunes. And don't forget to share this podcast online to help our community grow.
Welcome to Constellations, the podcast from Kratos. My name is John Gilroy, and I will be your moderator. Today, we are recording this from the floor of the Small Sat Conference in lovely downtown Logan, Utah. Our guest is Dr. Rachit Bhatia, Space Safety Analytics and Research Lead at a company called LeoLabs. Well, at Constellations here, we will be talking about space domain awareness and the changing face of space sustainability. But if I look at your LinkedIn background, I see a PhD and a school, and we are here at Utah State University, so this must be your homecoming, is that right?
Indeed it is. It is lovely to be back home, and I spent 5 good years doing PhD here. Yeah. I just love this place.
So were you one of those skinny, starving graduate students looking for snacks at these shows?
That's true. I used to spend nights here.
Just looking for food and talking to what's going on, huh?
Yes.
Well, you're like a homegrown expert. We love that. Well, we're going to jump right in here. First of all, I know your company does surveillance of low Earth orbit with ground-based radar. So why radar? What's so special about that?
Radars are best suited for low Earth orbit monitoring because they have large field of view, and we can track these dynamic objects moving at very fast speed relative to each other and get all of these observations very quickly. Because when these objects are passing over radar, we are just getting measurements, and we are operating these radars 24/7. No interference because of weather, no problem whether it is day or night, and these operate just in such remote places and autonomously. So the best example is we deployed our Kiwi space radar just before pandemic, and it was working throughout the pandemic, and we got all these measurements coming in from that radar without any human operating the radar on the ground. So that is the beauty of the sensor. The objects in low Earth orbit are moving very fast. They are moving at 12 km per second relative to each other. So optical sensors and other type of sensors like passive RF, etc., they can be great follow-up, but radars are very good for tracking these chains of objects that are being launched these days because there are these mega launch vehicles available. That is why radars are best suited for low Earth orbit.
Rachit, it's almost like you work hand in glove. Your technology at your company fit perfectly when they had to have something autonomous. It was right there, wasn't it?
It is.
And I think that's the goal for all these people spitting out artificial intelligence. The real goal is have something do it autonomously because there's too much to handle manually.
That is correct. LeoLabs has built these radar technology over decades. This is a technology perfected by our founders when they were working for the parent company SRI. So this technology is not something that has sprung up over the last few years. Even though LeoLabs has existed since 2016, the technology was perfected over decades. It was primarily being used to study auroras in the polar regions, and that is when they found that they can track satellites, which were noise then when they were trying to do their scientific research, but was signal when you're trying to do space situational awareness. And that is how they started working on this project, and that is how LeoLabs was born.
Yeah. So it's not just in the Arctic anymore, it's all over the world. If I understand your company correctly, you're building radars all over the world so they can map the objects in low Earth orbit and maintain a dynamic map of what orbits are. So how does this dynamic map work?
That is a great question. It is not easy to map entire low Earth orbit because one of the major criteria here is that when some object is in low Earth orbit, say 400 kilometer, the altitude of International Space Station, the orbital period is just 90 minutes. That means they're completing a lap around the Earth in 90 minutes. And if you are not tracking them regularly enough, then the uncertainty on this track can grow and the information will become not actionable or useful. And now with the growth in population, in resident space objects, as we call it in technical term, the growth in population in all these satellites and debris specifically that we are seeing in low Earth orbit, it becomes imperative to have regular tracking. And that is exactly what LeoLabs is trying to do. We are trying to fill in gaps where there are no sensors right now around the world. Like Southern Hemisphere was not very well covered, so we have put two radar sites, one in Western Australia, one in New Zealand, to track the Southern Hemisphere, the objects passing over Southern Hemisphere, and then put more radars out there so that we can get more frequent tracking on all of these objects.
Yeah, I'm trying to coin a phrase here, but tracking the LEO is kind of like an onion. There's a lot of layers, huh?
Yes, that's true.
Maybe you can explain that to your class when you start teaching here in a few years. Novices to this world may not understand what a conjunction is. They think that's something to do with grammar. But in the satellite and space community, it means a collision, right? And so people just casually refer to conjunctions. I want to talk about that now. This risk of a satellite conjunction is evolving. Tell us about those changes and what that drives mean.
So this is a very, very basic misunderstanding that people have. There's a difference between conjunction and collision. A conjunction is when the two objects are approaching each other and can collide or can just whiz past each other. That can happen. So conjunction is when we are monitoring them, we are trying to make sure whether they will collide, what is the probability of collision. And then collision is when it actually happens. So up till now, according to NASA, there are only approximately 235 collision events that have happened since the age of space began in 1957. So that is where we are. The conjunctions are happening right now, and many of those are low risk, many of those are high risk. And the way we define that is when the probability of collision is past a given threshold. Generally, the criteria that we follow is 1 in a million chance of the objects colliding is when we start monitoring them as high-risk conjunctions, and there's a risk reduction maneuver needed to make sure that everyone stays safe and the objects don't collide. So having noted the difference between conjunction and collision now, the major part of risk that is coming for low Earth orbit objects is from the debris and derelict objects, because these objects just can't maneuver. There are a lot of questions about the constellations being launched, but these have been very responsible objects in orbit up till now, as they have made sure that they act and they have required amount of onboard resources to maneuver and stay safe. But there are a lot of objects which have been left over decades since the space era began, like rocket bodies and the derelict objects that were created and non-operational payloads, and the debris that was generated from some of the anti-satellite tests, which are actually the problem and drive most of the risk to these neighborhoods, as we call them. So there are some altitude regimes which are very bad neighborhood. They are not so good to be not so safe for your satellite, and hence one should think about the risk that will be posed to their satellite when they are trying to put that satellite up there.
So Rachit, do you think this is due to an increase in the number of satellites in orbit, or just our behaviors changing too, or what's really the cause of all this?
Yes, the behavior is changing over time. There is a lot of focus on having much robust approach for space situational awareness. There is a lot of awareness among the customers and a lot more that can be done. The primary change in behavior that we see is most of the large constellation companies are trying to make these operations autonomous, and they are trying to put relevant checks and bounds so that they can keep maneuvering and making sure that their satellite stays safe. And they have a very good thresholds to monitor, and the teams that interact with commercial SSA companies like LeoLabs throughout the time of events, such that these can be mitigated effectively. There's a lot of focus coming in from government as well, where there are new agencies and new roles assigned, and the DOC, Department of Commerce, spearheading some projects which will be influential in creating new SSA environment for the country will be very effective.
Good.
So in that sense, yes, the behavior is changing, but the geopolitical impact is definitely there, and there are more things that can be done. One of the things that we have noted as we generate a lot of data, the insights that we get is that there is a huge debt from Cold War era that is impacting the operations right now. When we do top 50 most risky objects in low Earth orbit right now, 78% of them are from Cold War era, because these are rocket bodies that were left at that time thinking that these will not be imposing any harm, but these are up there, and these are tumbling rocket bodies. They cannot maneuver, and if you are in the neighborhood, you have to save yourself.
Yeah.
So that is where the risk is.
Well, that's a fun fact. I'll have to use that when we do our competition next year. Stump the chump or stump the nerd or something, and ask these specific questions. I didn't know that figure. 98%, that's very high. Rajit, your company is using data from radar for space traffic management, safety of flights, and to monitor what is happening in terms of irresponsible actions, or let's say potential threats. So is there any kind of new technology helping you to assess conjunctions earlier than you already are?
Yes, my primary role at LeoLabs is to do mathematical modeling of the events that we are seeing, do conjunction assessment modeling, and assess the statistical risk that we are seeing as it evolves over time, and how to mitigate it in terms of the change in environment that is needed, what kind of objects can be removed once the ADR, active debris removal, technology becomes available. So what we are seeing is we are using our real intelligence and artificial intelligence to help solve this problem. Yes, artificial intelligence is very useful, and we deploy it at relevant projects, and we have used it for object characterization and improving some of our already existing algorithms. And we do data fusion with all our radars, different radar sites. We are bringing in all the data, and we are fusing the data to create near real-time insights and alerts for our customers. So those are the technologies that we are already using, and then we are also using real intelligence in terms of like the decades of knowledge that our experts bring to the table, and they provide context, and they provide how to interpret the data so that we can understand the pattern that we are observing and use it to frame a story and use it to have a robust policy and mitigative guidelines.
The Constellations Podcast was launched back in 2017. It was a small step for man, but a giant leap for podcasting. Today, thousands of people from all over the world listen to the Constellations Podcast, and thanks to you, we've grown into more than just a podcast. Sign up for the Constellations newsletter to receive articles on current industry issues, podcast summaries, and contributed blog posts at constellationspodcast.com. So, Rachit, I listened to a few presentations yesterday, and I'm glad you used the word 98%, because I think 98% of them use the word artificial intelligence. Probably the people at the lunch people are talking about artificial intelligence, but I think you're one of the few organizations that have that massive amount of data that you can filter in and separate, what's hot and what's not. And that's my next question, is this massive amount of data. I mean, how can you keep track of all this? How does your company manage and process these huge volumes of data that you guys collect every day? How do you do it?
That's a great question. So since you liked 78%, let me give you one more statistic. We have been monitoring all of this data, and we are generating measurements and tracking all of these conjunctions over time. And what we have seen is top 15 clouds, debris clouds in low Earth orbit right now contribute to 15% of fragments that are still up there in the orbit. And this is after decades of them being there and having decayed over time. So that is the kind of insight that you can get. And 45% of conjunctions being generated are because of these debris clouds, which could have been avoided in the first place. So these insights are powered by the data that we are generating. And your question is, how are we managing this data? The best thing that our team has done is to architect the overall system in a manner where they anticipated that such a requirement will come, where the scalability will be needed. And that is where we differentiate from legacy systems. As we are a commercial company, we anticipated that scalability, transparency, traceability of our solution is needed, and we built our system, designed our system around it. We do use Amazon Web Services and other, again, new technologies to manage and store our data, but we are also using our architecture to improve the screening processes. One of the best things that I've seen while I've been at LeoLabs is when we actually get an update on an object, a position, velocity, state vector update on an object, we screen it against all other objects in the catalog to determine whether a conjunction will be happening or not. And guess what? We do it within 2 minutes, even sometimes in a minute, which is very different from a legacy system, which can take hours, which used to take hours to screen to know whether there will be a conjunction or not. So that is the kind of scale that we are operating at, and making sure that we keep our customers informed.
In pro football, they call it a 2-minute drill, huh?
Yes.
I've been taking notes here. I'm familiar with the public cloud, the private cloud, the hybrid cloud, and I got a new one here, the debris cloud. I guess this is a breakthrough in this interview, huh?
Yes.
Different applications here, but, it's like fun with clouds. So there are people at Utah State University, and they may have heard of LeoLabs, and I think some of them refer to your company as the Google Maps for space. But a real-time map, and you just use that word real-time map, is always changing in low Earth orbit, as it is very dynamic, open environment. So I don't think Google updates their maps very quickly, especially the overhead views. So when something new appears in space, how do you determine what it is and how it should be cataloged?
This is directly related to our radar network, global radar network. So this is a great question in terms of how are we monitoring continuously? And that is why we are not content yet with all our 6 radar sites. We want to put out more radar sites out there because we know it will be needed to make sure that we update our maps more frequently so that we get a much more actionable insight on all the objects, and it can be maintained that way for a longer period of time. There are a lot of factors there. There is atmospheric drag, which decays the object. So again, there are these perturbations that act when someone is operating in low Earth orbit environment, and this can be challenging because all of these perturbations actually perturb the orbit just a little bit, that the uncertainty grows, and this uncertainty can become pretty big over time if your measurement was taken a while back. And the best way to keep the map dynamic is to have more sensors and get frequent measurements.
I want to expand on that measurement concept a little bit. 1 month ago, I did an interview with a gentleman. We talked about geo-referencing. And I'm wondering, do you cross-reference your data measurements with other measurement types as well?
Yes. All of our radars, the way it has been, the architecture has been built, all of our radars operate independently, and they are putting their data into the main system. And so we should rethink of all of our radars as individual sensors. So one cross-reference is happening within the system where we are getting data from all our radars. The other kind of cross-referencing is happening from operator side, where they are ingesting, we are ingesting their ephemeridis because no one knows where the satellite is better than the operator. So they have GPS on board. Many of our customers, they share their eFilms, and we use them to help them get better results and screen it better so that they can get actionable insights on conjunctions. So we have radars which are helping us cross-reference. We have operators which are sending their eFilms, and these are regularly being compared to the updates that we are generating from our radars. So there is cross-referencing there. And then the third layer is, of course, the public catalog, which is very important, and the huge amount of work that is being done by 18th Space Defense Squadron and now 19th Space Defense Squadron, who are maintaining this public catalog for so long and so effectively that we use them, that data, to make sure that we are tracking all the objects and all the conjunctions correctly.
Rachit, I bet when you were studying here, all the physics major had a real need for speed. In fact, look around this room, we see military types, they have a need for speed. And I think we can all conclude that satellites in LEO travel incredibly fast. Okay, well, that's good. But if you were to anticipate a conjunction, how much time would you have to contact a satellite operator and theoretically move a satellite in a different path? I mean, all kinds of questions here, layers upon layers. What about fuel? Would this information build up over the course of passes? Do you think in general you have enough information ahead of time to alter the situation? Take action, Rajit.
Yes. So this is something that I actually presented yesterday and was one of the main focus of my study as I dwell upon the different requirements for different satellites. There are satellites which have very good onboard resources, big satellites, they have thrusters, they can maneuver very quickly, and they will still have some lag time, but there are such satellites. And then there are small satellites. Since we are at Small Satellite Conference, the focus was on small satellites and how they have limited onboard resources, and they need much earlier advance notice so that they can mitigate the risk effectively. So having taken all of it, and then there is also the approach which different operators take, because these mitigative strategies vary from operator to operator as they take into consideration their mission requirements, they take into consideration their onboard resources, and based on that, they decide whether they want to go for just-in-time collision, like some of the operators do, which monitor these high-risk conjunction events up to 12 hours before the time of closest approach, and then they maneuver so that they have to save, they are both safe and save on fuel, because their idea is that they have the sufficient capability and they are waiting for the most recent, best specification on the other object, lowest uncertainty to act upon. So it is like going all the way close to the wall and making sure, okay, there's the wall, now I can deflect just enough so that I can miss it. It's a great strategy, and they do it every time, and they have that has worked phenomenally. But then there are other objects which do not have that much capability, so they act up to 24 to 36 hours before. And all of these maneuvers, risk reduction maneuvers as we call them, they take quite a long time, because all of these delta Vs are on the order of a few centimeter per second and only sometimes meter per second, because of the type of thrusters they have.
Most conversations at lunch, I'm sure, if they talk about diplomacy, global diplomacy, they're pretty negative. However, we seem to be developing a more global diplomacy here regarding sustainability in space. So how do commercial SDA providers enable transparency among each other? Are there some common database or a catalog they can reference?
Yes. One of the things that LeoLabs do is we are collaborating. We are ready to collaborate, and we partner with a lot of these operators who are operating in space. We work with national agencies and make sure that we are providing our insights to them about relevant events and sharing our data at regular intervals of time. And the other thing that we do is make sure that the policymakers and regulators are informed by building dedicated tools for them, because that is very important. So when we do that, we are providing insights to them, and because we are sharing our data and we are regularly publishing at conferences like these, we are getting validated and peer reviewed by other agencies, which is great, because that is how the system should work. Regarding the governance and the defense, one of the things that we have seen is with the rise of commercial space, there is a faint boundary between military space and the commercial space, and that is exactly which makes it much more riskier. And having a comprehensive space behavior awareness helps in making sure that everyone is aware of where they are and everyone is under the surveillance, so that the behavior can be noted, there are no surprises, and make sure that the military and commercial stays.
Yeah, I live in the Washington, D.C. area. Everyone pontificates about this policy and that policy, and it's wonderful. I mean, it makes for a great lunch conversation. But, the how has to come in somehow. How can commercial and government stakeholders work together to minimize risk of this collision space? This is the how part, Rajit. That's the hard part, isn't it?
Yes, it is. The commercial and government can work amazingly well, because there's a need for commercial to bring in the innovation. Just like LeoLabs building these radars really quickly and providing this data at a competitive cost and at the requirements that meet the operators. The government is focused on making sure that this data is available to everyone and making sure that everyone stays safe. So there is a national system required, which is augmented by the commercial system, and that is where what our approach has been. We want to work with the national system to make sure, and the global system, because global tracking that we are providing with our global radar network will help in monitoring the objects in low Earth orbit, which is very important and cannot be done by a single or few sites located at a very limited geographical region.
I've talked to many DevSecOps people and network administrators. They all love the word transparency. It's quite important, So let's talk about transparency in your situation. So how can transparency in space enable the responsible deployment of dual-use capabilities on orbit?
This again comes back to making sure that the military and the defense and commercial systems stay segmented, and that is the best way to maintain the safety for everyone, and also making sure that the commercial viability of the environment is maintained and the effective use can still happen. To do that, transparency is very important, because many of the objects in low Earth orbit which can maneuver, if they are sharing that they are going to maneuver and they are sharing their ephemeris, the position and velocity well in advance, and making sure that everyone knows where they are, and using a good SSA system or service, then they will be able to make sure that everyone knows and stays safe. The traceability of the solution comes into play for LeoLabs, from LeoLabs side, by sharing our metrics about which radar is performing and most of our radars are 24/7, but all of the statistics are available to our customers 24/7 as well. The biases, the noise value on these measurements are available, so that the operator who is ingesting our state vector can know whether this is an outlier measurement or this is a regular, accurate measurement, and depend their actions based on that.
We're kind of running out of time here. I'm going to ask you a quick question here, too. The obvious thing is that there are companies and countries in the world that have their own systems, And now we have LeoLabs. And so commercial tracking capabilities expand. How do you see the usage of those capabilities versus these indigenous national systems?
We believe that LeoLabs system will augment the national system. The national system will be focused on the national requirements, and LeoLabs will bring in the global perspective into it by sharing the data from global radar network. The low Earth orbit objects cannot be completely tracked by a few sites, a few sensors in a limited geographical location. So a global cooperation is needed, and a global sensor network is needed, and that is exactly what LeoLabs is trying to achieve.
Earlier in the interview, I mentioned the 2-minute drill. Aaron Rodgers and all that. I'm giving you the 2-minute drill here. So in 2 minutes here, real quick question here. As commercial satellites are openly threatened by other countries, how do you see the SCA environment having to change?
The space domain awareness environment is changing by accepting the traceability and transparency in the system, especially from the commercial actors. The commercial actors are embracing this. They are putting out their ephemeриdes regularly. They are putting out their the events that they are facing, and they are making sure that the commercial SSA services are validating their claims, and doing that, they are making sure that there's a differentiation between the defense and commercial operators, and everyone knows who is operating in a particular environment, and there are no surprises. So that is how the environment is changing, and they are also preparing for the future events by taking responsible action and making sure their behavior is responsible and safe for everyone in the neighborhood.
Great.
One of the other things that we have noted is that a considerable cooperation and continuous communication is needed between satellite operators and SSA service providers like LeoLabs. We have published a report today where we actually did this experiment and helped university students find their satellite when they launched recently. Many of the operators are unaware of how difficult it is to catalog an object immediately after launch, and how quickly the data becomes obsolete. That is where LeoLabs come in, and we are able to track these satellites and provide up-to-date information to the operators so that they can get early signal acquisition, and they can mitigate the conjunction risk immediately as they get on orbit, instead of waiting for them to get cataloged and prolonging their conjunction risk.
Well, Rachit, I have to say, you have helped our listeners understand the complex world of space safety. I'd like to thank our guest, Rachit Bhatia, Space Safety Analytics and Research Lead at LeoLabs. Thank you.
Thank you. It has been a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Constellations, the podcast from Kratos. If you like this interview, please subscribe, tell a friend, and give us a review.